Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to a Week 16 edition of the Thursday night Establish the Show Showdown edition. I'm Gary Hartman, joined as always by the Showdown King himself, Cody Main. Cody, how you doing today?
36.5 point total, and Adam decided to just say F it. Nah, I'm out of town for the week right now because who wants to really talk about Jags, Jets? It looks like it's a week 16 that is definitely going to be affected by weather, certainly starting with tonight's game at MetLife. So I think that's maybe where we begin. This is going to be an ugly week as a whole, and we're going to get our first taste of it tonight.
Yeah, for sure. We talk a lot throughout the year, and I think we've done it a bunch on these one-game slates about weather. And I think a lot of the time, as Adam will always astutely discuss, it is overblown, and no pun intended. That unless we're getting serious wind gusts or monsooning type rain that would impact the ability to move the ball, or same thing with the snow, it doesn't matter. I think this week, finally, starting with tonight, it's a week that it's going to matter. And I'm across, especially, it almost, the NFL is shooting themselves in the foot with this Saturday slate. Because I think if it was Sunday, we wouldn't be dealing with nearly, and obviously that's Christmas Day. Happy holidays to everyone out there. But we wouldn't be dealing with nearly as much of these weather concerns. Tonight's just an unlucky thing. It is not nice weather here in New York. I'm 20 minutes away from East Rutherford here in the city. It is going to be rainy, very windy all night. It is definitely not a nice day for football. And then, you're going to see that right into Sunday as we kind of hit this, what do they call it? A vortex or some sort of cold, freezing flash freeze front across the entire nation. So definitely something to consider, I think, starting tonight. So I do not think we could poo-poo the weather. Maybe a little bit we can compared to what it's going to be like on Saturday, but I don't in general. So that's my weather spiel. And I think it's something that's going to be impacted tonight for sure.
Yeah, I'll kind of give my take here, and then I'll kick it back to you, because as someone who I know, you're playing large field tournaments on the main slate, playing large field tournaments in Showdown, like you're looking for spots where maybe the field is overreacting to stuff that we can't perfectly quantify. And certainly we have a tough time trying to quantify how much weather will impact projections, how much will weather impact an overall slate. Tonight we're looking at kind of the trifecta. It's going to be cold and wet in East Rutherford, and we're going to have winds, sustained winds between 15 and 20 miles per hour. We're going to have gusts up to 35 miles per hour. Certainly for these passing offenses, I think it will be an impact. The one thing I'll always say as someone who doesn't want to overreact to the weather bro stuff is we are trying to quantify this in projections. It's already accounted for in the 36.5 point total. It's accounted for in some of the play calling stuff that we're trying to funnel through with this stuff. So I would try not to double count it, try not to triple count it when you're going through and building lineups and you're looking at projections. We are trying to quantify it. But for you, Gary, as someone who's looking for spots for leverage, do you think the field is going to, and we'll get to this when we get to ownership projections and stuff, but do you feel like this is going to be something where the field is going to accurately account for how much weather is going to impact this slate, or is it a spot for leverage where maybe we can kind of jam in some passing attacks because it's going to be under-owned?
Yeah, I would imagine that these guys are going to get a little under-owned as far as quarterbacks and receivers are concerned, and teams are really going to radiate towards defenses and running backs. But I am not as familiar with the historical trends on one-game slates as you are, so that would be kind of my gut as someone that would think about these types of things and how it might impact game script. But I'm not entirely sure. I do know for main slate, certainly that stuff, especially when weather on Sunday morning starts really getting spoken about big time, it definitely impacts. For example, the Vikings Giants this weekend is going to get steamed out of like crazy because it's in a dome with a high over under compared to 95% of the other games that are dealing with weather this week. So I know it definitely impacts the main slate. I would throw it back to you as far as how, if you have any examples you could think of, or what you've seen in the past with situations like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, if Adam was here, Andrew called this out perfectly. If Adam was here, he'd be like, well, Adam, there's 30-mile-an-hour winds. What am I supposed to? Adam, there's a half an inch of rain. What am I going to do?
This is a good Adam impression of the weather bro impression. That's good. You did well.
And it's a limited fake Levitan making fun of the weather bros. But I do think this is going to be a situation where you have competing narratives, or maybe the same narrative of especially on the Jets side, and we're kind of going right into quarterback here, but Zach Wilson, nobody wants to play this guy as is. And now we have a situation where they can justify the fade even to a higher degree because of the weather issue tonight. So I do think we will see individual pieces of the Jets passing attack owned. We'll see individual pieces of the Jaguars passing attack owned. But I think the full captain quarterback double stacks or like 4 or 5 pieces of a particular passing offense owned in a single lineup will be wildly unique tonight. I don't think you'll see that all that much. I don't think you'll see like double pass catchers being owned together all that much. I do think that this slate in particular, from kind of a macro perspective, does set up for a lot of DST ownership, for a lot of running back ownership. And then that kind of parlays into the roster construction stuff. Like the Jets are now the totals, or the spreads flip back and forth. And the Jets were favored. Then it was the Jags by 1.5. Now I think we're back up to the Jets being 2.5-point favorites. We're not seeing that really play itself out in the roster construction table. We're seeing a little bit more ownership on the Jaguars side. And if you guys have access to the solver, if you have access to the ETR projections, if you just ran 300, 500, 1,000 lineups, you would likely see more utilization of 4-2 Jets, 5-1 Jets stuff. So I think that that's a spot that I want to lean into, kind of fade public perception, kind of fade the weather stuff, and maybe play into some Zach Wilson stuff, as gross as that may be to stomach. But I think we are going to get paid off with a pretty significant ownership discount tonight.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to know. Last thing I'll say about the weather, and we'll talk, we'll dive right in, is I grew up going to games at the Meadowlands. 30-mile-per-hour gusts in the Meadowlands are serious. Like the old Giant Stadium was more so than the MetLife, but the way, just for whatever reason, the way it's positioned in that part of New Jersey, kind of in that swamplands over there, like the weather does get seriously into that stadium. So the wind does. So the gusts, I'm not so concerned about the sustained. It's the gusts. When the gusts come through, that could be bad. So anyway, shout out to Dave on our team. Going to be there, boots on the ground. Have a good time tonight there, my friend. Stay dry, stay warm. Let's dive right in here. Anything else? I know you just kind of hit on the macro construction stuff. Anything else there before we dive into quarterback?
Yeah, I just think the last thing that I'll note is like salary doesn't matter all that much unless you're really jamming in the top of the slate, which I don't think a whole lot of the field is going to do. I think they'll find their way down to the 3 and 4K range with DSTs, who we'll talk about in a second here. There's some interesting mid-priced options on tonight's slate. So I don't think salary comes into play too much. And for those that like to leave salary on the table to get unique, you could set your cap even lower tonight if you wanted to. If you're somebody that normally sets your cap at 49.4, 49.5, and you want to get even lower, I mean, I think anything under 49 is still going to give you a relatively reasonably projected lineup while helping you get more unique.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So you started hinting at quarterback there. Obviously, we're a little bit concerned about the ability to throw the ball here tonight. Definitely a tale of two quarterbacks as far as public perception, trending direction, all of that kind of thing. And that is then Trevor Lawrence, somebody you and I have spoken a lot, especially on our collectibles podcast, as somebody that, we were interested in investing in the offseason, and he's really paying off now over the last 5-6 weeks. He's been the optimal quarterback on main slate, I think 2 or 3 times over the last 5 weeks, which is really impressive even in the mid 5K range. So the guy's really starting to come into his own as someone that a lot of people consider the best, quarterback passing prospect since Andrew Luck, at least as far as just like pure, crispness and kind of sure thing. And he's starting to show it. I think the marriage between him and Doug Peterson is a good one. His weapons he's making the most of. Obviously, Zay Jones has been, outperforming, I think, what our expectations were. Evan Ingram as well. So he's got a full arsenal, playing really well. Is significantly more expensive than Zach Wilson. 61% though, for me, for the way he's been playing, seems a little low. I get it's a lot of weather and it's a lot of matchup, but curious your take on maybe the hottest quarterback in the league right now, Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, weather and matchup definitely doing a large part of the heavy lifting there in keeping Trevor Lawrence's ownership down. I would say that certainly in some higher stakes, smaller field contests, that ownership is going to be closer to 70, maybe 75%, which I think is probably more efficient. But this is a really tough matchup from a passing perspective. Yeah. Per our DVP tool, it's the second worst fantasy matchup for opposing quarterbacks. And, you throw in the weather component, which I just kind of poo-pooed for the Zach Wilson side. I think the 60% is still a little bit too low on Trevor Lawrence. I think Trevor Lawrence is somebody that we want to have in cash game contests, is going to be a staple in tournament lineups, regardless of how you want to play the weather. I mean, you just get into a situation where if you're playing the weather narrative this hard, you're going to be building lineups that are leaving, 25, 30K or something like that on the table, which just isn't feasible on a slate with such few options. So I get it. I would imagine that Trevor Lawrence's outlook is much lower than it has been over the last couple of weeks, where he's been, like you mentioned, one of the hottest quarterbacks in the entire league. But he doesn't need to beat 12 other, 24 other teams on a slate. He just needs to beat, enough guys in a 1-game sample to be optimal at both captain and flex. So I think it's relatively efficient in terms of his ownership. I would still probably have more than the 61% total and probably more than the 14% captain. I do think there's a ceiling on those projections because of the weather related concerns that I don't think all of a sudden we're going to run into like 80% total ownership on Lawrence and like 25% captain. So I'm not too worried about playing into, what is a little bit chalky, because I think that there's a, relative cap to his ceiling ownership.
Yeah, I agree. I'm equally bullish. So, I also think the interesting thing is, so he gives you like another extra 2-3 points usually with his legs, sometimes more, because he killed Russian. He had a rushing touchdown 2 weeks ago, had 2 rushing touchdowns in one game. So like he has, I think, 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns on the season. Usually is somewhere between 20 and 40 yards rushing on the ground. So, that's like a nice 2 or 3 points extra. He's shown a little bit more than that at times. And then this is going to be a game both from the pass rush, from the weather, where I think, we usually see between 3 and 7 carries from him. I wouldn't be surprised if we get 10, 11, 12 Trevor Lawrence carries tonight, both a mix of designed runs and, plays that break down. And I think that gives Trevor a floor here between what he might be able to do through the air. I think Peterson's, a very strong offensive coach right now. He's going to simplify things for the weather, for the tough Jets defense. I'll talk about some Jaguars pass catchers I'm bullish on as a result in a little bit here. But I think at 60%, I'm going to play against the weather narrative here, against the matchup itself narrative, and play into the hot hand, play into the best quarterback on the slate, and play into it pretty heavily. So I'm pretty big on Lawrence here. Other side of the coin, completely different story as far as I mentioned, public perception, what we're thinking. This is, didn't even think about it. It's a number 1 versus number 2 pick in last year's drafts. And man, how far we've come since then. Obviously, I think all Jets fans can agree. I'm sure Dave would agree that we wish it was Mike White, White Lotus creator Mike White, performing in this game right now. Obviously, he's ruled out on the short week. So we do get a 9,800 Zach Wilson. If you look at his stats last week, I know Adam and Evan were talking about this on the Team by Team pod. Not that bad, especially for fantasy purposes. But still, I mean, and you wrote about this in your article too. I think their offense knows the difference between what Zach Wilson can do and what Mike White can do. So they're simplifying things, trying to make things a little easier. And then, you throw weather into the mix here. I think you're going to even have to do that even more so. The one thing we're acting in his favor is the Jaguars have certainly been a pass funnel. So why don't you talk a little bit about that and how you're approaching Zach Wilson here tonight?
Yeah, look, like even if the weather isn't a factor tonight, I think Saleh and LaFleur and this entire organization understands the difference between Zach Wilson and even Joe Flacco and certainly Mike White, and they're playing to that. We certainly see it in play calling with 8 games with Wilson under center. New York's 22nd in pass rate over expectation, 17th in situation neutral pass rate. So certainly a little bit more run centric with him under center. Now you add in the weather component. I would imagine that LaFleur has a game plan, at least from the very beginning, assuming this stays relatively close, to try and keep the ball on the ground and avoid a bunch of Zach Wilson dropbacks. You're seeing that in the prop markets. You're seeing that kind of throughout his projection and everything. And still, with all of that, this is like, we talk about how Zach Wilson somewhat took advantage of a porous Lions defense, a porous Lions secondary last week, and maybe got lucky with a few low probability catches last week. This matchup is even better, per our DBP tool, per Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, really whichever metric you prefer to look at. This is a better matchup for Zach Wilson than was the Lions of last week. So yes, I am concerned about the weather. Yes, I am somewhat concerned about in-game benching. Like if he goes out and just throws a pick 6, maybe it's Joe Flacco time, because this team still does have a playoff push in them. But I think the field is already matching those concerns and probably playing into those concerns a little bit more than they should be. We talk about salary not really mattering on this slate, but we still see the field getting to less than 40% of a $9,800 Zach Wilson. I think the combination of public perception, everyone is out on Zach Wilson, the weather. I just think that this is a situation where, I see some other sites projecting 40, 50+% ownership on Zach Wilson. I don't see it. I think I feel even a little bit uncomfortable having him at 39%. Could see this coming down even more. And I just think it's a classic situation where if you're basing your lineups on projections, which I mostly am, then I think he's going to be optimal far more often than the 39% or lower that he's owned. And I kind of just want to play into that. And if I get beat because it's Zach Wilson in the rain and in the weather, then that's how my night's going to go. But I think it's a relatively strong play at 4 or 5% captain ownership and 35 to 40% total ownership.
I agree. All right. Nothing to add there on quarterback. I'm with you on there. Let's talk about running back. And I think it's the most important position on the night outside of quarterback, because we mentioned these guys getting steamed up. I can definitely see it happening here on a game where I think we took an over on Travis Etienne rushing attempts prop over with our props team yesterday, and you can understand why that happens. Also worth noting here, Zonovan Knight, technically listed questionable. I do believe Bam Knight is trending towards playing, but another thing to consider here when considering running back. So I'll just throw it over to you from a running back as a whole here. There's not that many names that we're considering outside of those top three in ETN, Knight, and Michael Carter.
Yeah, you mentioned ETN possibly getting steamed up, Bam Knight possibly getting steamed up as well. I think you're absolutely correct in those assumptions. If we're not going to see a bunch of Zach Wilson ownership, I think some of that will funnel to Travis Etienne. Certainly we'll have the money to pay up for the $9,600 price tag. So 75%-ish total ownership on ETN would not surprise me. 20% total. A captain wouldn't surprise me either. His role has been fantastic since they got rid of James Robinson. He hasn't really capitalized yet as a pass catcher, but he's still out there for a bunch of long down and distance. He's out there for a bunch of the 2-minute snaps. So that capability of earning targets and catching passes is at least still there. And if this matchup does funnel a little bit more run centric because of the weather, he's handling 66.7% of the team's rushing attempts. He's going to be out there for all the high value touches in the red zone near the goal line. And, you mentioned we took over on his prop. I think that he's kind of not necessarily a lock, but really likely to get 20 plus touches tonight. And we can't say that about too many options on this slate. So I think Travis Etienne is another really, really, really strong cash game option and will be a staple of tournament construction tonight as well.
Agreed there. I think I'd lock him in cash personally, even in the tough matchup here. Little dump offs that he'll be involved with as well. I want to talk about Michael Carter because I think Michael Carter is really interesting. And I know that Bam Knight is clearly ahead of Michael Carter in this offense right now, and their price difference is not enough where you could say, okay, I could play into that lesser Michael Carter role. Let's think a little deeper here. The run rate might be a little bit higher or a lot higher for the Jets tonight. He's somebody that's had a lot of success in the past. Maybe they're comfortable putting him in that pass game role once again. High volume of dump offs. But I'm more concerned about Zonovan Knight's ankle here, and I think he is going to play. But I think the risk of re-aggravation potentially. The risk of softening his workload as well due to this injury, I think is a serious thing to consider here. So I think when we're only working with one game and we're trying to think of ways to get unique here, and you can get a fraction of the ownership on a guy we've liked playing in the past, this undrafted rookie just came out of nowhere to kind of supplant him. I like Michael Carter a lot as a one-game play here tonight, personally.
Absolutely. And this is another thing that's tough to quantify along with the weather related stuff, but you're playing on what I would imagine would be a softer field because of the rain, because of the temperatures and things of that nature. Like how much would you increase Knight's chances of getting, re-aggravating that ankle injury tonight? I think it has to be elevated at least somewhat. So that can partially play into the calculus on top of them just potentially reducing his workload. These two backs have certainly played very, very different roles as is expected. Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight has kind of just been more of the bruising back. He gets a majority of the base down work when both of these guys are healthy. But then, Michael Carter from a PPR perspective, which we love on DraftKings, he has been the guy that is getting those 2-minute snaps. He's getting those long down and distance snaps, and he's going to be the guy that they go to in those outcomes anyway. So you're telling me I get a Michael Carter who's $600 cheaper, much lower owned, is already the guy that has the passing down role and has at least some upside to eat into the base down work. They've used him in that capacity in the past. So I would not be surprised to see this split be a little bit closer than maybe we have projected, given some of those injury concerns. And then also we know that Carter's going to be out there for the pass down stuff. So I love that call as someone who's going to be, a third or a fourth of the ownership of his backfield mate.
Yeah, I have a Michael Carter BBM semifinals team that would love for him to be the guy tonight. So that's all I'll say about it.
This was a guy, you mentioned how we've been excited about this guy in the past. This was a guy that on our 0 RB FFPC main event team, which I know no one wants to care about. We drafted this guy for his early season role because we thought it would be relatively strong. Obviously that has changed as the season has gone on, but now that we've got Bam Knight dealing with the ankle, you certainly would not be shocked to see the balance of power shift a little bit here and Michael Carter be a little bit more utilized for this team. Yeah,
somebody that I think a lot of 0 RB drafters were excited about. People were excited about for best ball, and he was somebody that we were starting somewhat confidently before the James Robinson trade and before especially Breece Hall broke out in those first 5 or 6 weeks. So I agree. I think this could be a spot. I don't want to be doing Zonovan Knight disjustice, but I will be coming under here at 51%. I'm just a little bit scared of him here tonight at really high ownership if I was MMEing. Now, if I'm playing cash and you really want to lean into this type of defense running back build, for sure, go both running backs, go both defenses. And if you could fit a quarterback and then punt your last spot or something like that, that's kind of the way I would play it.
Yeah, this is a very much a cop-out answer, but I think Zonovan Knight is a perfect cash game piece because of the way we project this game to play, and somebody that you can come in underweight in tournaments. It's a two-down back largely for the most part. On a team with a low total, I don't think the touchdown opportunities are necessarily going to be there all that often for Zonovan Knight, but he could certainly put up 15 rushing attempts for 80 yards, and you might be doing backflips if he does that in a cash game contest. So I like the 7K price tag in cash. It could elevate his ownership in tournaments. And if that's the case, I'd like to just come in underweight that.
JaMychal Hasty, any interest before you go to receiver?
I had really never considered it. I know he's got a little bit of a projection there at 2,800. And then I was just reading through Silva stuff, and it looks like he's got a few touches over the last couple of games. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about Jamal Agnew. All of these dust balls have me confused. Not too much interest in JaMychal Hasty outside of those game plans where, maybe we see a lot more rushing attempts from the Jaguars. But I will talk
last
about
week.
Jamal Agnew.
I'm looking at PFF right now. Hasty only played one snap. Snoop Connor played one snap last week as well. Agnew played six rushing snaps, I guess, in 3 attempts. So yeah, I see what you're saying.
We took that, the last point here on like this backfield projection, we took that over on ETN, and I think Mark had kind of mentioned that we're on the lower end of ETN's rushing share over the last couple of weeks since James Robinson has been out. So it's possible that like JaMychal Hasty and Snoop Connor just don't play at all. So
23 snaps for ETN last week, 19 attempts on those 23 rushing snaps.
Huge work
of rushing play snaps, I should say, not total snaps. So 19 attempts, and I think he was only projected for like 15 and a half or something, and now in bad weather, like the roll is really good there. All right, that's enough running back talk. Let's move on to wide receiver. Let's break it down team by team. Let's start on the Jacksonville side. I'm going to start out straight up off the top and say I really like Christian Kirk here tonight. I'm really scared of the two Joneses personally on the outside, dealing with those two really good Jets receivers. I think a lot of people want to play Zay Jones coming off the volume he's been getting, and Kirk is just too expensive. I'm actually surprised to see 40 total percent, but it's still not enough for me to be deterred. I think that obviously a tough matchup for all these guys, but I'd rather play the middle of the field. So I'd rather play the Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram types. So I guess we could throw tight end in here as well. Although Ingram, I agree with you, too expensive and a little steam probably for what you had written in your article. But I'm in on Kirk and pretty much out on the other two Jags main receivers for me personally. Curious your take.
Yeah, so just a peek behind the curtain on kind of how the sausage is made here. I write up the game and then kind of run ownership after the fact. So generally you'll see some stuff in there that's like, I thought Christian Kirk was going to come in much lower owned than expected when I was writing it up, given the price tag. But as it turns out, I ran ownership. You really just don't need the salary savings, which is why I think we're seeing 40% Christian Kirk. But I wouldn't be surprised if he and Zay Jones were flipped, or if Evan Ingram came up even a little bit more. There's a relatively significant price gap between those two, given their recent production. So I think you could see ownership come down on Christian Kirk if more of the field finds their way to Trevor Lawrence, if more of the field finds their way to Zach Wilson and some of these expensive options. But generally speaking, we've got the salary to play with. So I think the field will find their way onto Christian Kirk. And you mentioned it. I think this is a perfect opportunity for him to get back as kind of the wide receiver one in this offense. Though we've seen that go to Zay Jones. We've seen it go to Evan Ingram over the last couple of weeks. But he still leads the team in target share, air yard share, red zone target share, all of that in favor of Christian Kirk. And the way to attack this Jets defense is through the middle, through the slot. I think they'll try and find a way to do that with their wide receiver one tonight. So I love Christian Kirk. I think he's a fantastic option at captain. And I would certainly be over 40% in an MME run.
I should say I've been well over the field on Christian Kirk for 2 straight weeks, and Zay Jones has killed me for 2 straight weeks. So I guess I'm just not backing off my position now. And I get that he's coming through with more ownership than Zay here. But Kirk is like a main slate play the past 2 weeks, just stood out so much as a GPP option. And the Jaguars have been doing it. And like last week he was fine, but Zay still just was so much better. And then the week before that, he completely busted. So he's still having a really good season. The role is still there, but we can't deny what Zay Jones has been in this offense. So any interest in Zay at 8,200 there, obviously dealing with Sauce, probably a lot of Sauce, which scares me.
Yes, I mean, Sauce Gardner, obviously, and DJ Reed on the perimeter are just two guys. And I hate to be the guy to overreact to wide receiver cornerback matchup, because I think offenses can win out if equally matched. But I think this is a situation where they may just have the number on the perimeter, the Jets defense, that is. And it's got me scared to play Zay Jones into any amount of ownership. It's got me scared to play Marvin Jones, though we're kind of getting an ownership discount there. But like Marvin Jones's way that he wins is deep. And that's where a majority of his targets are going to come from. He's got a team high 13.7 yard ADOT. 27% of his targets have come 20 yards downfield. And that's what the Jets secondary is good at limiting. So if you want to bet on a big Marvin Jones completion downfield, by all means, have at it. But I just don't think this is a spot for him or Zay Jones to get loose. So you're going to see a lot of my lineups have Christian Kirk in them.
Agreed. You mentioned Jamal Agnew, who's somebody that I think we all take for granted on these one game slates because they really like drawing up little plays for him. You know, he's involved in the red zone. He has a nose for the end zone. He scored a bunch of times over the last 2 seasons. And, you know, they give him some carries too, as kind of the backup de facto running back at times as well. So I think at 2,000, he's a really interesting one game, you know, slate play.
Yeah, and this was the guy that I was mentioning when I was thinking Jamal Hasty. I was actually thinking Jamal Agnew, and I just got onto this reading Silva's matchup column before hopping on the show, and he mentioned that he warrants one game DFS tournament mention, and I kind of agree after reading his reasoning. And, you know, we don't want to overplay the CSU Ram double dip narrative, but he does return punts. So if you want some correlation there for Jacksonville's DST, you have that opportunity. But more so with the way that this team might need to draw up plays offensively. Evan mentioned that he's handled at least 4 offensive touches in 3 of the last 4 games. If there were ever a time for them to draw up more jet sweeps, draw up more quick hitting routes to one of their better playmakers, this could be a game where maybe those 4 touches turn into 6 or 7 touches. And if he happens to house one at 2K or even break off a big play, you know, 5% ownership, I think that's an interesting way to play into, okay, maybe this team doesn't pass, it doesn't drop back as much as Cody thinks they do, or the weather impacts the game more than Cody thinks it will. Jamal Agnew, I think in those outcomes would be getting more of those design touches.
Yep. And obviously a tough matchup, but like his 2 touchdown game this year where he was 4 for 50 in the air with 6 targets was against the Eagles in Philadelphia. And that was a 2 touchdown game, 21 DraftKings points. He had a 14-point DraftKings points a couple weeks ago against Baltimore, caught 5 balls on 5 targets. He's just like, you never know when he's just going to pop. And then he'll give you like a 1 or a 2 the next week, but you just never know. He's like this kind of guy that just lingering around that could pop. And then you mentioned you throw in a little bit of extra, you know, 1 or 2% chance of the punt return stuff. Like he's the kind of guy I like playing on Showdown slates for sure.
And the fact that it's coming with 5% ownership, if this was 10, 12, 15% ownership because we needed the salary relief, like no chance that would be a guy that I would play, especially at 2K. But yeah, I mean, play into that narrative that there's some potential that he earns a few more opportunities as kind of the special, that type of specialist in this offense. And I think that he could certainly break the slate at 5% ownership. So I would want some of that in my MME portfolio.
Yep. Before moving on, I do want to talk about X Giant. I'm not going to say X Giant great, even though that's kind of my default is to say X blank my team great, because he's not an X Giant great. But I want to talk about X Giant Evan Ingram here, who obviously completely, you know, broke the slate 2 weeks ago now on the main slate, you know, priced up because of it to 7,600. He's been good. And this is the role that I would want to attack, similar to the Christian Kirk in the middle of the field. Not only would I rather attack the middle of the field for the Jaguars, they've been writing up plays for Evan Ingram. They've been, you know, the Jets, if there is a weakness on their defense, I think it would be against tight ends where they're kind of just league average. So at 28%, this actually seems like a spot that's not too bad to me. I'm curious how you feel about Ingram here.
Yeah, normally it would feel chasey given what he had done in kind of the recent weeks. And I know last week he didn't necessarily get there to the degree that he did the week prior. It still would feel a little bit chasey, especially at this elevated price tag. But if it's going to reduce his projected ownership, then why not? This is the spot to attack the Jags defense, the 11th best matchup for the position, the Jets defense, 11th best matchup for the position when we know how good they are on the perimeter. I think if the team wants to still drop back, there might be more quick hitters. There might be more stuff open over the middle of the field for somebody like Evan Ingram, and 20%, 28% ownership. I think I prefer that at 7,600 over Zay Jones at 36% or more at 8,200.
Yep, agreed. All right, let's talk the Jets side of wide receiver tight end here. Obviously highlighted by star rookie Garrett Wilson. Priced all the way up to 9K, but you do get a discount on Christian Kirk, and I would definitely argue that Wilson may have a higher ceiling with how he has played of late. Obviously, Corey Davis back this week, or projecting. I guess he's fully back. Is he off the injury report altogether?
Yes, Corey Davis should be back. I think he goes cleared from the concussion.
Cool. So you have a big 3 there because Elijah Moore has kind of re-implemented himself into a serious role. So let's talk about those big 3. How are you treating the Jets passing game and receivers there?
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting because I think the field will pick and choose where they apply their logic to the how much the weather is going to impact the slate, and it doesn't feel like they're going to assume that it impacts Garrett Wilson too much, though they will assume that it impacts guys like Zach Wilson. So I think Garrett Wilson is going to garner plenty of ownership, and rightfully so. The 9K price tag is very nice. He's right there, right around Travis Etienne. He's a little bit more expensive than Zay Jones, cheaper than Christian Kirk. I think he ends up being one of, if not the most popular option of that group, and for a good reason. He's been the wide receiver one in New York, regardless of who is under center. He leads the team in target share, air yard share, red zone target share. The fact that Corey Davis and Elijah Moore have kind of cemented themselves, will be back cementing themselves as the wide receiver 2 and 3 in this offense, I think is good for, the defense not being able to apply too much attention to the rookie wide receiver. So I love Garrett Wilson. Think he can be an option in a cash game contest, though I don't know that I would get there myself. I would prefer the running backs. I would prefer the quarterbacks. And then we'll get into some cheaper options there. But the guy that I think I'm most excited about before I kick it back to you is Elijah Moore. It seems like he has cemented himself as the team's slot receiver with Corey Davis back on the perimeter, with Garrett Wilson mostly playing on the perimeter. And the slot is where this Jaguars secondary has been beat the most. They've given up the third most DraftKings points to slot receivers this season. And I think that with Elijah Moore's skill set, with his talent and lower ADOT type routes, would really play into the way that I think this offense wants to play tonight with Zach Wilson if they do drop back. And Elijah Moore's 4,800. Doesn't appear that his ownership is going to get steamed out of control, despite the very nice price tag on him. So I think Elijah Moore is my favorite pass catcher in this Jets offense.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I've been playing Elijah Moore as kind of one of my spend out options on main slates of late when the field hasn't really been on him as much. I would do a very serious negative correlation between Corey Davis and Elijah Moore if you weren't ruling them out altogether. I think for a lot of the reasons we've been talking about all show, whether passing game concerns, but as you just mentioned, all the Garrett Wilson metrics as far as his role in that passing game. It would be very surprising for me to see Davis and Moore get there together very often. Obviously, in a Zach Wilson captain lineup where you're fading Garrett Wilson, that could be a unique way to have a double stack. But if it's not a Zach Wilson captain lineup for me, I would be seriously negatively correlating Davis and Moore personally for me. And then you got the two tight ends there. Last week was an Uzoma week, 2 touchdowns, found the end zone. I think Conklin's been kind of more of the steady Eddie on this offense throughout the season, but I think both guys kind of cancel each other out as far as upside is concerned at times, or just kind of I'm throwing a dart to know which one it's going to be. Logic would tell you it's a Conklin week after an Uzoma week last week, but who knows? I think both guys are fine plays. You could play into the ownership discount on Uzoma, and you get a little bit of a price discount as well. You have any takes on the 2 tight ends?
Yeah, when I wrote up the slate, it was a situation where I thought, hey, Tyler Conklin is priced nicely enough. I think he's involved offensively enough with a 15.2% target share. His routes run have certainly been better than Uzoma's for a majority of this season. I thought, man, maybe Tyler Conklin is somebody that we can consider in cash game contests as part of salary relief, but it just doesn't seem like we need to get all the way down to the 3,200 for Conklin. That generally means he's going to be a little bit lower owned than we're projecting because the field just doesn't find it necessary to get down to this range. I think he's an okay option, but certainly the ceiling is capped there. I would much prefer him closer to 10% than 20. But I think just as kind of dart throws in this offense, touchdown or bust type options, they make a little bit of sense.
Yep. Okay, cool. Anyone else punt guys here? We talked about Agnew on the other side. Berrios still involved here. I saw Denzel Mims started getting involved a little bit, but now Corey Davis is back. So I don't know.
Yeah, and it should note that Denzel Mims and Jeff Smith are expected to be out, if not already completely ruled out. And so that will keep Braxton Berrios somewhat in play. 1,600 with that base projection of 3.8 DraftKings points should certainly make your MME player pool. I would also probably set, if not just a negative doc on Elijah Moore and Braxton Berrios. You could group it out entirely. I think Braxton Berrios, if he were to get there, would have to steal more of the slot snaps from Elijah Moore, which certainly hurts Moore's chances of finding a ceiling. But we've seen Braxton Berrios play on 30 to 40% of the team's routes, and at 1,600, it's enough for him to still warrant some large field MME consideration. But now with the big three of Davis, Wilson, and Elijah Moore kind of cementing themselves as the Jets' wide receiver rotation, I have a little bit less interest in Berrios.
Okay, fair enough. All right. I think this is more important than normal talk on the specialists here. So let's talk kickers first, because I think defenses are more important on this slate. It's going to be hard to kick tonight. At the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if offenses get stalled out a lot. So it's kind of a, which one do you think wins out? I think opportunities will be aplenty if coaches are willing to send out their kicking units and think that they can get it done. And I think they will. Not too much ownership, 20 and 20%. Thoughts on the kicking game tonight?
It is an interesting conversation between the DSTs, the kickers, and then the skill position players that are priced around these guys. I know I snuck into the props, the NFL props team Slack channel, and saw that Dink had taken an under 6.5 kicking points on Riley Patterson, given the weather concerns. I think that makes sense. Basically betting that he kicks under 2 field goals in tonight's game. I think that kind of makes sense, but I think the field will think that way as well, which could result in a little bit of an ownership discount here. And I'm kind of interested in the perspective that you brought up, that these teams might be, efficient enough running between the 20s to get into scoring position, but then struggle to close it out when they get close to the goal line or get in the red zone. And that could set up, kicking opportunities for both Greg Zuerlein and Riley Patterson. If you tell me that the ownership is going to stick around 15 to 20%, I do have a little bit of interest there. And I think that it is going to stick in that range because both DSTs are cheaper. And as we can get to here, like the DSTs, I think are going to catch a ton of ownership tonight.
Yeah. So how were you approaching DST? Any interest at captain, first of all? Second of all, how are you approaching them as far as against the field? Do you have a preference between the two?
Yeah. I've been notoriously underprojected captain DST ownership for years now, and it's tough for the algorithm to catch up to how much the field wants to play DSTs when they project this well and they're this cheap, and we have the weather concerns, and it's Zach Wilson. I think that we're going to see probably 35 to 40% ownership on both. Mm-hmm. It's rare that we get 2 DSTs that project this well, and both are under 4K. So I think we could see 6 to 8% ownership on Jags captain DST. And similarly for the Jets side, I think we could see 6 to 8%. They're really, really cheap. And it's not rare that you'll hear me say this, but I think both make sense in cash. We have the weather concerns. We know Zach Wilson is mistake prone. And even if he's not turning the ball over with sacks and fumbles, he is prone to taking sacks. And I think the Jags defense can get after him tonight when he is dropping back. And on the other side, this Jets defense has been very good, man. And I think that they can apply pressure. The Jaguars will be without, I think it's starting left tackle Cam Robinson, which is an obvious concern. They've been able to apply pressure. They've been good in the secondary. I know that Trevor Lawrence has been playing really well, but I think that there are mistakes certainly within his range of outcomes. So it's a tough pill for me to swallow, but I think both of these defenses make sense in cash. I worry that they're going to be too owned for me to play into it too much, given how volatile the position is. I don't know if I can play it in tournaments, which is going to be really hard to watch this game if both of these defenses go off.
Is this going to be the cash lineup tonight? Because you could fill it in so easily. ETN captain, Zonovan Knight, both defenses, both quarterbacks, and it uses exactly the right amount of salary. So
I think that's going to be relatively close to what is played.
Yeah, I mean,
and like the position is, we talk about this every time on this show, like this position is just so tough to project, and we're often wrong when we think we can project it well, that it could be an opportunity in cash game contest to maybe just play one or not play either and hope that you get, variance bounces your way and the DSTs score below their median, and you kind of have to get yourself onto a different construction, because
that's what I was
it is
say.
A very volatile position that we have very little ability to project accurately.
Yeah, I would do a quick 1v1 of like whatever defense you take out, do maybe only play the quarterback that is alongside that defense. Like don't you know what I mean? Use the correlation as far as that's concerned. Maybe you could do a 1v1 or a 2v2 to get a little bit more unique in your cash game lineups tonight, because I would imagine they're going to be mega duped, as they usually are. But tonight particularly, I think it's just such an obvious path.
It builds itself with the narrative that you want to play into of the running backs plus the DSTs, and then you've got the salary to get to the quarterbacks or whoever else you want there.
All right. Is it too cute to X out kicker altogether? I think it is, Matt. I would, no problem if you want to dock their projections a little bit, or if you're just really concerned about the weather. But I do think it's a little bit too cute to X them out altogether. Not sure if you have a take there.
No, I wouldn't X them out in even like a 20 max or MME type portfolio. I think I still want some exposure. I think the fact that the field's going to be overreacting to the weather is a good opportunity to get kickers at really low ownership.
Yep.
Which
Cool.
DST is your preference for cash if you can only play one?
Yeah. It's really tough there because I think you're seeing the Jaguars as kind of a result of Zach Wilson, but
Yeah.
the Jets are at home and have a better defense and might be a little bit more unique even in cash, which is we were just mentioning as a way to get different tonight. I think I would lean Jets here personally.
Yeah,
But
I'm kind of with you, and you don't lose points for for Trevor Lawrence completing passes, for moving the ball
right.
downfield, which I think he's more likely to do than Zach Wilson. You do get points for turnovers, for sacks, and I think the Jets defense has as good of opportunity to pull those off against Trevor Lawrence.
Right. Okay. I think let's run to Flag Panther. I will give you the honors, my friend.
Yeah, I talked about it. I'm not going to, and Charlie in the chat mentioned it as well. Fade the weather FUD. I'm kind of with Charlie on that. I think that the field is going to overreact to the weather, and there should be some reaction given what it projects to be: 15 to 20 mile an hour sustained winds, gusts up to 30, 35 miles per hour, cold, rainy. It's Zach Wilson. No one feels good about it, and for that reason, I think we're going to get a really good ownership discount on this entire Jets passing offense. I will not flag plant Zach Wilson. I think enough of the field will get there, but I will flag plant one of his pass catchers who I think will benefit as a result of Zach Wilson playing better than expectations. And that is the de facto slot man in New York now, Elijah Moore, $4,800. I think he is now a permanent fixture in their offense as the slot receiver. And I think that that's the best way to attack in weather. I think that's the best way to attack this Jaguars secondary, quick hitting, low ADOT routes for Elijah Moore. I think Elijah Moore finds his way into the optimal lineup tonight.
Nice. I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah, I'm not fading the weather. I am fine fading the weather as well. But I am still going to go to a running back here that I think is going under owned. And I think the price, close to the guy in front of him, makes it a really strong tournament contrarian play. And I'm going to go Michael Carter here. Did play 33 snaps last week. Zonovan Knight did get banged up in that game. But we know he's a reliable pass catcher. Maybe some dump offs are what we need in this spot. Plus, I think the chance of re-aggravation of the Knight injury, or as I mentioned, just a lesser workload potentially in the mix for Zonovan Knight on a game that I think we can project for a lot of rushing work. So I like Michael Carter a lot in tournaments tonight. I will go that direction. All right.
I love it.
That will just about do it. I wish you guys all the best of luck as we get started here on week 16. If you're in your semifinals for best ball, for regular season, if you're just going to be sweating out this fun one in the Meadowlands here tonight. We will be back. Probably no Saturday or Sunday show because it is Christmas Eve and Christmas. So wishing you all the happiest of holidays. But we'll be back next week for week 17 single game slates or Monday night. Yeah, we'll be on Monday night. I think we'll be back. I'll be around Monday night. So count on us then. And have a great Thursday. Happy holidays, everybody. Take care.